Hey everybody. This video is about week 7 material, particularly the Federalist Papers 47 and 51. We give you a summary of those two that I put together, and then the Pestritto article on the birth of the administrative state. Try to make this as quick as possible. So there's 85 Federalist Papers, and they were a collection of pitches for the new government, for a federal constitution, a central government, and then several states having some autonomy. The Federalist Papers. Now, Federalist 47 is a pretty famous one because it lays out the argument for why we ought to separate powers, legislative, executive, and judicial. And it's not a very complicated argument. You don't want all that power, all those three powers in one set of hands. It seems like, well, it's the one government, but those three parts of the government are really substantially separate. They fight against each other all the time, which is by design. We want the president to have interests that sometimes conflict with the court or the legislature, because that means they're not colluding together to screw us over all the time, which is the central point. And I think if you read that little paper I wrote, there's something, I give you an example, like, you don't want your relationship with your government to be like the relationship between a parent and a child, right? My children have a benevolent dictator, me and my wife, right? And so we are not perfect. We make mistakes. We are either too lenient, or we maybe punish too quickly. We're having good days, we're having bad days, who knows what, right? But nonetheless, for my children, I am the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. My relationship with my children is mediated by love, but yours is not mediated by love with your government. And so you don't want all that power together. You want them separated out, so that, you know, if the legislature does something crazy, the executive and the judiciary will say, hey, you can't do that, or vice versa. And we've seen, you know, for example, some of that with President Biden wanted to forgive a whole bunch of student loans. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. That's the power of the purse. That's the legislature. President Trump, right on, was it Liberation Day or Freedom Day or something, a little over a year ago, he put these tariffs all across the world. And eventually, right, took a minute, but the Supreme Court said, no, those are illegitimate. You don't have the power to do that because the reasoning why you said you did it was illegitimate. Anyway, so we separate powers for a very good reason, because we don't want arbitrary power exercised, right? If power is held in one set of hands, then they can pick winners and losers. They can pick friends. They can pick enemies. They can punish people unfairly. They can benefit their friends unfairly. We don't want a system like that. So Federalist 51 then goes a step further and says, not just why we want to separate the powers, but some technical, logistical ways in which we might do it. And so we take the House and the Senate, the two most powerful elements of the government, the legislature, we separate them. The president is one individual, very powerful, but not as powerful as the legislature. Has the power to veto, but it's not an ultimate power, because the Senate and the House can then, through a 2/3 majority, overturn a presidential veto. The Supreme Court is actually quite weak by comparison. And in fact, it carved out for itself in the Marbury v. Madison case the judicial review power to say to one of the other branches, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. Well, okay, so you can pick the different branches of government in different ways. Consider this. The legislature is the most powerful part of the government, right? It makes the laws and controls the money. It's the closest to us, the people. We directly elect our House members, and we currently directly elect our senators, right? So it's a popular vote body. And it's supposed to be the most powerful body in the government. The president is a very powerful individual, not as powerful as the legislature, but it's a step away removed from us. I know some of you wrote about how much you hate the Electoral College. Fair enough, it's frustrating. But the president was never designed to be elected by popular vote. We elect these different branches in different ways to keep them separate with different interests, which is why actually the House and the Senate were initially elected by different means. Popular vote for the House, but popular vote within the state legislature for the Senate. Remember, the 17th Amendment changed that. So the legislature closest to us, most democratic. President, a little bit removed from us. There's a buffer in between, and the judiciary is the weakest branch of government, but it's also the least democratic. right? Because the president nominates these members and the Senate confirms. So these are different ways we can keep the government separated, logistically speaking. Also, I think relevance is a consideration for a lot of you, I think, talk about the value of democracy, and I would urge you to reconsider its ultimate value. It's got some value, but it's got a lot of flaws. What if we were to pick the Supreme Court members by popular vote? By what means would we choose the most qualified individual? Have any of you been to law school? I spent 1 year in law school, right? So I have a teeny bit of understanding, and that doesn't make me qualified. Do you have enough legal information, legal knowledge to be able to read through each Supreme Court candidate's library of decisions, both dissenting, concurring, right, and in opposition, and understand the legal reasoning that they use in all these different cases, so that you can make an informed decision about who should be sitting on that Supreme Court bench? Emphatically no. We, the average people, just don't have the time or the knowledge or the expertise to do it. That's not an egalitarian democratic concept, I understand, but it's not designed to be that way, and it's not an appropriate way to choose them. Democracy and democratic institutions are not always the best option. So that's what 47 and 51 are about. Now, how do they tie into the Pestritto article? Pestritto and the Birth of the Administrative State is Ron Pestritto explaining why he's frustrated with the progressive movement. Before we go further, the progressive movement of the late 18 and early 1900s is not the social progressive left movement of today. They were generally considered left at the time, sure, but their social views were really not tied to this. So there's connective tissue over time, but the progressives back then are not the same progressives today. They have a lot of different things about them. It's worth considering. Pestritto's frustrated because the progressive movement in the late 18, early 1900s sought to create a much more robust administrative state under the executive branch that would be, and is now unaccountable and unelected, right? So, but we don't put them in power, the vast administrative branch of the executive. We don't vote for them, and they're not accountable to us, the voters, which is, a bit frustrating. Why would they want this? They want this, the progressives of the time, as Pestritto explains it, they want this because the world is changing rapidly. The industrialization of the world and of American cities, the railroad, the expansion, the incorporation, the financial challenges of the new world that they live in required governments to make decisions and set policies for things. And it was too slow. It was too sluggish for their preference. So the progressive era said, we've got to get these constitutional protections out of the way. They are hampering our growth, our progress. And they thought it would be okay to do this because they have a different version or a different view of human nature than do Pestritto and the founders. What are the two different perspectives? I'll tell you. The founders set up the concept of separation of powers because, and you can read through it, right, of course, understand, they believed humans were fallible. Not sinful, right, but fallible, corruptible. We can be selfish, we can be arrogant, we can play favorites, right? Loyal to this group, not to that group. All of these things are just natural because of our basic human nature. We're not perfect. We don't always make the right decisions. And even in those original documents in Fed 47 and 51, they talk about if we were governed by angels, or if we were ourselves angels, then all of these governmental restrictions and protections and limits on government wouldn't be necessary. But of course, we are involved in the system, and so we need the system to be limited so that we don't unjustly, right, exercise power beyond what is appropriate. The founders believe that. That's why they created the government the way they did. Over time, those protections have been stripped away because it caused the government to be slower to react, which was also by design. So the progressive era thinkers, they say, no, humans are not like they used to be. We don't need those old protections. They're unnecessary. They're just dead weight. Humans now are better smarter, more honest, with greater integrity. They can just do the job for the sake of doing the job without partisanship or bias. I find that to be insane, to say the least. Nonetheless, this is what they believed, and this was their argument for why they needed or should be able to expand the government and create a more robust administrative state, and specifically eschew, right, the protections, constitutional protections of limited government. In the article, you will find direct quotes from Wilson and from Goodnow expressing their ideas, and so you should find those because they're tied to the assignment. Of interest, though, was Goodnow, Frank Goodnow's specific quotes, I think, to the tune of, he didn't even believe in natural rights, inalienable rights. You have rights based on what the government allows you to have, and that's it. And sadly, I kind of agree with him that it's true, but to say it so boldly in rejection of the founding principles of inalienable rights gives you a pretty solid understanding of what he thinks about civil liberties, right, and inalienable rights. You don't have them. You do what I say because I'm the government. And that is a bit disconcerting from my perspective. So anyway, this gives you, I think, a good start into understanding what Fed 47 and 51 are about, what the Pestritto article is largely frustrated with. Then you can understand his arguments and his examples as he moves through. And this will hopefully help you also to complete your assignment. Good luck.